Galactic Envoys shuddered as a human snapped an alien behemoth's spine by hand, reaches its pinnacle when Colonel Reynolds, trapped in the auxiliary hangar, faces a second, more powerful behemoth. With her body broken and weaponless, she climbs onto the creature's back and, drawing on her last reserves of strength, snaps its reinforced spine, proving humanity's terrifying potential to the watching galaxy. The silence in the negotiation chamber on Orinthia 7 was punctuated only by the soft hum of atmospheric regulators and the occasional shuffle of datapads. The year 2473 had brought with it the tenuous hope of peace between the Galactic Alliance and the Zarath Dominion after decades of cold hostility. Colonel Mara Reynolds of Earth's patrolling vessel Aegis stood at parade rest near the human delegation, her eyes constantly scanning the dimly lit hall. The high ceilings disappeared into darkness, with only thin strips of blue neon light outlining the architecture, casting everyone in an eerie, aquatic glow. Reynolds had been selected for this detail because of her impeccable service record. But those who knew her well understood there was another reason. She had lost her entire squad to a Zarath biological weapon 3 years prior. Her presence here was both a gesture of diplomatic goodwill and a statement. Earth remembered its fallen. Ambassador Xavier Hughes, leading the human contingent, was engaged in careful dialogue with Ambassador Thrax, the imposing Zarath representative whose iridescent scales shifted color with his breathing. The surrounding delegates from 17 other species formed a semicircle around the central table, all recording devices activated to ensure transparency. The Alliance's concerns regarding your biological development programs are not unfounded, Hughes was saying, his voice measured. The Tarsus incident demonstrated the potential for catastrophic cross-species contamination. Thrax's throat sac expanded slightly, a sign of irritation among the Zarath. And Earth's rapid military expansion into the Rigel sector demonstrates humanity's imperial ambitions. We will not be lectured on restraint by a species barely 3 centuries into interstellar travel. Reynolds maintained her stoic expression, but her jaw tightened imperceptibly. The subtext was clear. The Zarath viewed humans as upstarts, dangerous children who had stumbled onto the galactic stage with more technology than wisdom. Security officers from both delegations maintained positions along the walls. The Zarath had brought their own elite guards, imposing figures with ceremonial staffs that everyone knew concealed devastating energy weapons. As part of the pre-negotiation agreement, all delegations had submitted to weapon scans and had stored most security assets in a quarantine zone 3 levels below. Reynolds caught the eye of Major Cato, a Velen science officer whose translucent skin revealed a complex network of glowing veins. He gave her a nearly imperceptible nod. Despite being from different worlds, they had developed a solid working relationship during the preparations for this summit. The Velen were known for their diplomatic prowess and biological expertise. Having Caito as a bridge between species was invaluable. Just as Ambassador Hughes was elaborating on proposed mutual inspection protocols, a security alert flashed on Reynolds' wrist communicator. A single vibration, warning level 1. Something was amiss in the quarantine zone. "Excuse me, Ambassador," she whispered, bending slightly to speak into Hughes's ear. "Security matter. Continuing assessment." Hughes nodded without breaking his dialogue with Thrax, who had noticed the exchange and narrowed his vertical pupils slightly. Reynolds stepped back and discreetly activated her comlink to security. "Sit rep," she murmured, the subvocal microphone picking up her words despite their near silence. "Colonel, containment breach in Section 4B, came the tense reply from Lieutenant Narita. "One of the Zarath biological specimens has escaped quarantine. Security protocols activated, but—" A crash interrupted the transmission, followed by shouts. "Lieutenant," Reynolds pressed, already moving toward the chamber's exit. Ambassador Thrax's head snapped toward her, his species' acute hearing having detected something amiss. "Ma'am, it's one of their behemoths. It's headed for the negotiation level. We can't. The transmission cut off with a scream. Reynolds' hand moved to her sidearm, only to remember it was locked in the diplomatic security vault. Protocol dictated negotiations be conducted unarmed, a gesture of trust that now seemed catastrophically naive. "Ambassador Hughes," she called out, her voice cutting through the diplomatic murmurs. "We have a security situation. All delegates need to evacuate immediately to safe rooms." The chamber erupted in confused questions from the various species representatives. Ambassador Thrax rose to his full height of nearly 8 feet. "Explain yourself, Colonel," he demanded, his voice resonating through the chamber. Before Reynolds could respond, the massive titanium doors at the far end of the chamber buckled inward with a horrific screech of protesting metal. The security locks, designed to withstand explosive decompression, gave way as if made of clay. Through the mangled doorway stumbled a nightmare. The Behemoth was aptly named, a massive, hunched creature, standing over 12 feet tall with a segmented exoskeleton that gleamed wetly under the blue lights. Its 6 limbs ended in serrated appendages, and a cluster of sensory organs pulsed where a head should be. The Zarath claimed these creatures were merely biological security assets, but everyone in Galactic intelligence knew they were living weapons, genetically engineered for combat. The chamber exploded into chaos. Delegates scattered, security personnel moved to protect their charges, and emergency barriers began to descend from ceiling recesses, too slowly to be of immediate use. Reynolds assessed the situation in milliseconds. The Behemoth was between the delegates and the only exit. Ambassador Hughes and 3 other human diplomats were directly in its path. The creature's sensory cluster oriented toward the humans, and its massive frame tensed. She moved without conscious thought, years of combat training taking over, sprinting across the chamber floor. Reynolds placed herself between the Behemoth and the human delegation. She had no weapons, no armor, nothing but her uniform and her body. "Get back!" she shouted to the diplomats, never taking her eyes off the creature. The Behemoth charged, covering the distance between them with terrifying speed. Reynolds held her ground until the last possible moment, then pivoted to the side. As the creature barreled past, she struck with a calculated blow to what appeared to be a joint in its midsection. The impact sent shockwaves of pain up her arm. It was like hitting reinforced concrete. The Behemoth swung around with unexpected agility, one of its limbs catching Reynolds across the chest and sending her flying backward into the negotiation table, which collapsed under the impact. Gasping for breath, Reynolds struggled to her feet as the Behemoth advanced on the cowering diplomats. Ambassador Thrax was shouting commands in the sibilant Zarath language, but the creature paid no heed. Either it couldn't hear, or it wasn't programmed to obey. Reynolds knew she had seconds before the Behemoth reached the diplomats. With no time to formulate a plan, she grabbed a broken metal strut from the shattered table and charged the creature from behind. The Behemoth sensed her approach and whirled. Reynolds ducked under a sweeping limb and drove the metal strut into a gap in the creature's exoskeleton. A viscous blue fluid spurted from the wound, but the Behemoth seemed more enraged than injured. It lunged forward, massive jaws emerging from beneath its sensory cluster. Reynolds dropped the makeshift weapon and, in a move born of desperation, stepped directly into the creature's attack. As its jaws snapped toward her, she planted her feet and delivered a brutal uppercut to the underside of its sensory cluster. The impact sent agony through her hand and up her arm, but she followed through, using the creature's own momentum against it. In one fluid motion, she grabbed 2 of its front limbs, twisted her body, and used her shoulder as a fulcrum to flip the massive organism. The Behemoth crashed to the floor with a sound like a building collapsing. The chamber shook with the impact, maintaining her grip on its limbs. Reynolds placed her foot against what appeared to be the creature's spine and pulled with every ounce of strength in her body. For a moment, nothing happened. The behemoth thrashed, nearly throwing her off. Then, with a sickening crack that echoed through the silent chamber, its spinal column snapped. The sound was unlike anything the delegates had ever heard. Organic, yet mechanical, like the breaking of both bone and metal. The behemoth's limbs spasmed once, twice, then fell still, blue fluid pooling beneath its massive form. Reynolds stood over the creature, chest heaving, hands trembling from exertion and adrenaline. The silence in the chamber was absolute, as every delegate, every security officer, every diplomatic attaché stared in disbelief at the human who had just broken a behemoth's spine with her bare hands. Ambassador Thrax was the first to speak, his scales now a pale, ashen color. "Impossible," he whispered, the word barely audible even in the silence. Reynolds looked up, meeting the Zarath ambassador's gaze. "Your security containment failed," she said, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "This thing nearly killed everyone in this room." The implications settled over the chamber like a shroud. A behemoth, a creature the Zarath had insisted was merely an intimidation tool, incapable of true violence, had just tried to massacre the collected diplomatic corps of the Galactic Alliance. And a human, unarmed and unaugmented, had killed it with her bare hands. Ambassador Hughes found his voice. "I believe," he said carefully, "that we need to reconsider the parameters of these negotiations." Every eye in the room was fixed on Reynolds, who stood unflinching beside the fallen behemoth. The diplomatic incident had just escalated beyond anyone's wildest calculations. Security teams finally burst into the chamber, weapons drawn, too late to be of any use. Medical personnel rushed to check for injuries among the delegates. Reynolds allowed a medic to examine her hands, which were already swelling and discolored from the impact. "You'll need regenerative therapy," the medic said, scanning her hands. Multiple fractures in both hands. Torn ligaments. Reynolds nodded absently, her attention fixed on Ambassador Thrax, who was conferring urgently with his aides. The Zarath delegation was in disarray, their carefully constructed facade of superiority shattered along with the behemoth's spine. Major Cato approached, his translucent features clouded with concern. "Colonel," he said quietly, "what you just did, it should not have been physically possible." Reynolds met his gaze. "It wasn't a choice, Major. It was necessary." "The Zarath are demanding an investigation," he continued. "They're claiming the death of the behemoth constitutes an act of aggression against their delegation." A bitter laugh escaped Reynolds' lips. "Their security asset breaks containment, threatens the entire diplomatic corps. And I'm the aggressor?" She shook her head. "Politics. Politics that could end your career," Cato warned. "Brigadier General Harper is already talking about a court-martial for exceeding authorized force." Reynolds looked over at Harper, the Earth military attaché who had always viewed her with suspicion. The tall, silver-haired general was already in deep conversation with Ambassador Hughes, occasionally glancing in her direction with undisguised displeasure. "Let him try," Reynolds said, wincing as the medic applied a stabilizing feel to her hands. "I'll take a court-martial over a chamber full of dead diplomats any day." The chamber was being evacuated, delegates escorted to secure locations, while the incident was investigated. Reynolds found herself isolated, security personnel giving her a wide berth, as if uncertain whether she was hero or liability. As she was led to a separate secure room for debriefing, she passed Ambassador Thrax. The Zarath diplomat fixed her with his vertical pupilled stare. "You have made a grave mistake today, Colonel," he hissed. "That was a living being under my protection." Reynolds met his gaze unflinchingly. "That living being was trying to kill everyone in that room, Ambassador, including you." Thrax's scales shifted to a deep crimson. "We will require compensation for this life. The behemoth was rare and valuable. Send the bill to whoever was responsible for its containment," Reynolds replied coldly. "Now, if you'll excuse me." I need to have my hands treated." As she walked away, Reynolds couldn't shake the sensation that lingered in her muscles, the feeling of the creature's spine giving way beneath her strength. It shouldn't have been possible. Behemoths were known to withstand direct energy weapon impacts. Their exoskeletons were rumored to be reinforced with metallic compounds. Yet she had broken one with her bare hands. The implications would echo across the galaxy before the day was out. In the secure medical bay, Reynolds sat motionless as a regeneration field hummed over her damaged hands. The door slid open to admit Brigadier General Harper, whose expression suggested he'd been sucking on something particularly sour. "Colonel Reynolds," he began without preamble, "you've created an interstellar incident of unprecedented proportions." Reynolds kept her face neutral. "I prevented a massacre, sir. You killed a protected biological asset of the Zareth delegation. That asset broke containment and attacked the diplomatic corps." Harper's jaw worked as if he were chewing his next words carefully. "The Zareth are claiming it was an accidental release. They say the Behemoth was disoriented, not aggressive." Reynolds stared at him in disbelief. "I was there, sir. That thing went straight for the human delegation. It knew exactly what it was doing." "Be that as it may," Harper continued, "the diplomatic fallout is severe. The Zareth are demanding reparations, formal apologies, and your immediate removal from service." "And what is Earth's position on these demands?" Reynolds asked, already knowing the answer. Harper straightened. "You're being placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Your commission may be suspended." Reynolds nodded slowly. Politics as usual. Sacrifice a soldier to preserve the fragile peace. "And the negotiations?" "On hold indefinitely. The Zareth delegation has withdrawn to their vessel to consider their position. Meanwhile, half the Alliance species are demanding to know how a human managed to kill a behemoth with her bare hands." That was the real issue. Reynolds realized. Not that she had killed the creature, but that she had revealed a truth no one was prepared to face. Humans were stronger than anyone had believed possible. "What happens now, sir?" Harper sighed, some of his rigid posture deflating. "You'll be debriefed extensively. Every second of that incident will be analyzed. And you'd better pray the Zareth don't use this as an excuse to break off relations entirely." After Harper left, Reynolds closed her eyes, allowing herself a moment of weakness now that she was alone. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving in its wake a bone-deep exhaustion and the throbbing pain in her hands that even the regeneration field couldn't entirely suppress. A soft chime announced another visitor. Major Kaito entered, his luminescent veins pulsing with agitation. "I've just come from examining the Behemoth's remains," he said without greeting. "Something isn't right." Reynolds opened her eyes. "Explain." "The creature's neural structure." Kaito hesitated. "It's far more complex than anything previously documented. Preliminary scans suggest cognitive capabilities well beyond those of a simple security animal." A cold feeling settled in Reynolds' stomach. "Are you saying it was sentient?" "Not fully. No. But far more intelligent than the Zareth have admitted. And there's something else." Kaito lowered his voice, though they were alone in the room. "The spinal structure you broke. It's reinforced with an artificial compound that's not of Zareth origin." Reynolds sat up straighter. "Meaning?" "Meaning someone enhanced this creature beyond its natural capabilities. And given what I know of xenobiology, those enhancements should have made its spine virtually unbreakable. The implications hung in the air between them. Either the Zareth had been lying about the Behemoth's capabilities, or someone had tampered with the creature without their knowledge." "We need to investigate further," Reynolds said, already swinging her legs off the medical bed. Kaito placed a translucent hand on her arm. "The Zareth have demanded the remains be returned to them immediately. Ambassador Hughes is inclined to agree, to smooth diplomatic relations. Then we need to move quickly." Reynolds stood, ignoring the protest from the medical system. Can you get us access to the examination lab? Kaido's skin flushed with a pattern that indicated uncertainty among his species. It would be a direct violation of diplomatic protocol. So was releasing that thing into a negotiation chamber, Reynolds countered. Are you with me or not, Major? After a moment's hesitation, Kaido nodded. I'll create a diversion in the security systems. You'll have approximately 7 minutes of unrestricted access. As they moved through the corridors of the diplomatic facility, Reynolds was acutely aware of the stares from personnel they passed. News traveled fast in contained environments like this. Everyone had heard about the human colonel who had killed a behemoth with her bare hands. The examination lab was sealed with both physical and biometric security, but Kaido's credentials as a science officer granted them access. Inside, the massive form of the behemoth lay on a reinforced examination table. Its exoskeleton opened in several places where samples had been taken. Reynolds approached the creature cautiously, memories of their brief but violent encounter still fresh. In death, it seemed even larger than it had in the chamber. Here, Kaido said, guiding her to a neural scanner, displaying three-dimensional images of the creature's internal structure. See these formations? They're not natural. They've been artificially grown and integrated with the creature's own nervous system. Reynolds studied the images, though the specifics of xenobiology were beyond her expertise. To what end? Control, perhaps, or enhancement. Kaido manipulated the display, zooming in on the broken spinal column. And this is what I wanted you to see. The display showed the shattered vertebrae, but within the organic material was a lattice of metallic structures, now broken and twisted. That's not natural, Reynolds stated flatly. No, it's an alloy similar to those used in Stellar Accord military applications. Highly classified material. Reynolds frowned. The Stellar Accord was a militant faction within the Alliance, advocating for stronger military responses to perceived threats. They were influential in some circles, but had no official authority to access restricted materials. Are you suggesting the Stellar Accord had something to do with this creature? Kaido's skin patterns shifted nervously. I'm suggesting that someone with access to restricted Alliance military technology has been enhancing Zarath biological weapons. Whether with their knowledge or not, I can't say. The security system chimed a warning. Their window was closing. Reynolds quickly used her personal device to capture images of the scans. We need to get this information to someone we can trust, she said. That may be problematic, Kaido replied. The Stellar Accord has supporters throughout Alliance leadership. We don't know who might be involved. As they exited the lab, Reynolds noticed a group of Zarath security personnel approaching from the far end of the corridor. They moved with purpose, their ceremonial staffs held at the ready. Major, she said quietly, I believe our investigation has been noticed. Kaido followed her gaze and tensed. We should separate. Meet me in Storage Bay 7 in 1 hour. I need to secure this data. Reynolds nodded, and they parted ways. She heading toward the diplomatic quarters, while Kaido moved toward the science section. The Zarath security team split as well, the larger group following Reynolds, while two peeled off after Kaido. She led them through the busier sections of the facility, hoping to lose them in the crowds of support staff and minor diplomatic functionaries. It didn't work. The Zarath moved with single-minded determination, gaining on her with each turn. Finally, cornered in a maintenance corridor, Reynolds turned to face her pursuers. 4 Zarath security officers, each nearly 8 feet tall, blocked her path. Colonel Reynolds, the lead officer said, his voice a sibilant hiss. You will accompany us to answer for your crimes against the Dominion. Reynolds assessed her options. Her hands were still healing. Her combat capabilities diminished. 4 against 1 were poor odds under the best circumstances. I'm currently under Alliance jurisdiction, she replied evenly. Any questions should be directed through proper diplomatic channels. The Zarath advanced a step. The creature you murdered was sacred to our people. Justice demands blood. Reynolds recognized the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Your sacred creature tried to massacre the diplomatic corps. Perhaps you should explain why it was allowed to escape containment. The lead Zareth's scales flushed dark with anger. You will come with us now, human, or we will take you by force. Reynolds dropped into a defensive stance. I'd like to see you try. The first Zareth charged, his staff swinging in a deadly arc. Reynolds ducked under it, delivering a precise strike to his midsection that sent him staggering back. The other three moved in concert, attempting to surround her. Despite her injured hands, Reynolds fought with calculated precision, using the Zareth's size and weight against them in the confined space. She managed to disarm one, using his staff to keep the others at bay. But she was outnumbered, and her injuries slowed her reactions. A blow caught her across the back, sending her to her knees. Another Zareth seized the opportunity to restrain her arms. Enough, the lead officer said, approaching with a device Reynolds recognized as a neural suppressor, illegal in Alliance space. You will learn respect for your betters. Just as he raised the device, the corridor lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. Reynolds used the momentary confusion to break free, delivering a savage blow to the knee joint of the Zareth holding her. A blue glow illuminated the corridor as Major Kaito appeared, his body's natural bioluminescence providing enough light to see by. Behind him were 3 Alliance security officers with weapons drawn. Stand down, Kaito commanded the Zareth. You are in violation of diplomatic protocol by attempting to apprehend an Alliance officer without authorization. The Zareth hesitated, then lowered their weapons. This is not over, their leader hissed at Reynolds. The Dominion does not forget. As they retreated, Reynolds straightened, trying not to show how much the brief battle had taxed her still healing body. Nice timing, she said to Kaito. I anticipated they might attempt something like this, he replied. We need to move quickly. I've analyzed the data from the Behemoth. The situation is more complex than we realized. In a secure communication room, Kaito displayed his findings on a holographic projector. The neural enhancements weren't just for control, he explained. They were designed to interface with human brainwave patterns specifically. Reynolds stared at the display. You're saying the Behemoth was programmed to target humans? Not just target, influence. These structures here. He indicated a cluster of neural pathways. They're designed to emit frequencies that disrupt human cognitive functions. In essence, mind control. The revelation landed like a physical blow. The Zareth were planning to use these creatures to control humans? Kaito's skin pattern shifted in what Reynolds had come to recognize as his equivalent of a frown. Perhaps. But remember, the artificial spine components were of Alliance origin. This suggests collaboration, not unilateral action by the Zareth. Reynolds paced the small room. Stellar Accord. They've been advocating for more aggressive action against non-human species for years. If they could stage an incident, make it look like the Zareth attempted to assassinate the diplomatic corps, it would justify military action, Kaito finished, and potentially give them the political leverage to push for human dominance in the Alliance. We need to get this information to Ambassador Hughes. Reynolds decided. Whatever political games are being played, he needs to know. Kaito's skin darkened with concern. What if he's involved? The Stellar Accord has supporters throughout the diplomatic corps. Reynolds hesitated. The possibility hadn't occurred to her, but Kaito was right. They couldn't trust anyone blindly. Then we take it directly to Alliance Central Command, she said finally. But first, we need to secure the Behemoth's remains. If they're returned to the Zareth, we lose our only evidence. The transfer is scheduled for 0800 tomorrow, Kaito informed her. Security will be tight. Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. Then we need a distraction. Something big enough to delay the transfer while we secure the evidence we need. Before they could formulate a plan, the facility's alert system activated. Red warning lights pulsed along the corridors, and an automated voice announced a security breach in the lower levels. Reynolds and Kaito exchanged a glance. "The quarantine zone," they said in unison. Racing to the nearest security station, they accessed the surveillance system. The feeds from the quarantine zone showed chaos, containment fields flickering, security personnel engaged in combat with shadowy figures. "Those aren't behemoths," Reynolds observed, watching a humanoid figure efficiently disable an Alliance security officer. "No," Kaito agreed grimly. "Those are Zareth Special Forces. They're after something in quarantine." Reynolds tapped into the security comm channel. "This is Colonel Reynolds. What's the situation in the quarantine zone?" "Colonel," came the strained reply from Lieutenant Narita. "We're under attack. Zareth operatives breached the perimeter. They're trying to access Containment Cell 17. Reynolds felt a chill. "What's in Cell 17? A burst of weapons fire interrupted Narita's response. When he came back on, his voice was fainter. "Another behemoth, ma'am. Bigger than the first one. They brought it aboard but kept it separate from the one that escaped." Reynolds locked eyes with Kaito. "They're trying to release another one." "Or retrieve it before we can examine it," Kaito suggested. "Either way, we need to get down there." They requisitioned weapons from the security station, Reynolds taking a standard Alliance pulse rifle, while Kaito opted for a less lethal neural disruptor, and headed for the quarantine zone. The lift to the lower levels was locked down as part of the security protocol, forcing them to use maintenance shafts to descend. As they climbed down, Reynolds' comm unit activated. "Colonel Reynolds." The voice was Brigadier General Harper's. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" "Responding to a security breach, sir," she replied, continuing her descent. "You are on administrative leave and under investigation," Harper snapped. "You are ordered to stand down immediately." Reynolds paused. "With all due respect, sir, there's an attack underway on the quarantine zone. Alliance personnel are in danger." "Security teams are handling the situation," Harper insisted. "Your presence will only complicate matters. That's a direct order, Colonel. Stand down." Reynolds muted the comm and looked up at Kaito, who was watching her expectantly. "Orders, Colonel." She unmuted the comm. "General, I'm receiving weapons fire from my position. Communication becoming difficult." She deliberately cut the transmission. Kaito's skin pulsed with what might have been amusement. That was technically insubordination. "Add it to the list," Reynolds replied grimly. "Let's move." They emerged from the maintenance shaft into the corridor, leading to the quarantine zone. Signs of battle were everywhere. Scorch marks from energy weapons, abandoned equipment, and the occasional drop of blue or red blood marking the passage of combatants. As they approached the main quarantine entrance, they encountered the first casualties. 2 Alliance security officers sprawled lifelessly on the floor, their weapons still clutched in their hands. Reynolds checked them quickly, confirming what was already obvious. "Precision strikes," she noted. "These weren't killed in a firefight. They were executed." Kaito examined the security panel beside the quarantine doors. "The system's been compromised. They've overridden the containment protocols." Reynolds took up position beside the door, weapon ready. "Can you restore them?" "Working on it," Kaito replied, his fingers dancing over the control panel. "But we should assume the behemoth is no longer secured." The doors slid open a fraction, then jammed. Reynolds wedged her shoulder into the gap, pushing with all her strength to create an opening large enough to pass through. The scene beyond was one of calculated destruction. The quarantine zone, normally a sterile, organized facility, had been transformed into a battlefield. Equipment lay shattered, containment fields flickered erratically, and the bodies of security personnel and laboratory staff were scattered throughout. Moving carefully through the devastation, Reynolds and Kaito made their way toward Containment Cell 17. The sounds of continuing combat echoed from deeper within the facility. "Something's wrong," Kaito whispered. His natural luminescence dimmed to avoid detection. "The pattern of destruction. It's too systematic. Reynolds nodded, having noticed the same thing. They're destroying specific equipment, research stations, sample storage. She examined a shattered console. They're eliminating evidence. A thunderous roar shook the facility, followed by the unmistakable sound of metal being torn apart. Reynolds and Kaito broke into a run, following the sounds to Containment Cell 17. The reinforced doors had been ripped from their moorings, twisted metal curling outward like the petals of some mechanical flower. Inside, surrounded by a group of Zareth operatives, stood a behemoth that dwarfed the one Reynolds had encountered in the negotiation chamber. This creature stood at least 15 feet tall, its exoskeleton gleaming with a metallic sheen that the previous behemoth had lacked. Its sensory cluster pulsed with an eerie blue light, and when it moved, it did so with a precision that seemed almost mechanical. The Zareth operatives were attaching some kind of device to the creature's neural cluster. One of them noticed Reynolds and Kaito and shouted a warning in their native language. "Stop!" Reynolds called out, raising her weapon. "Step away from the creature!" The Zareth operatives turned as one, raising their weapons. The one working on the behemoth continued his task, fingers moving rapidly over the device. "This doesn't concern the Alliance," one of the Zareth said. "Leave now, and you may live. It became Alliance concern when you attacked our facility and killed our people." Reynolds replied, "Surrender now." The Zareth laughed, a hissing sound that set Reynolds' teeth on edge. "You are outnumbered, human, and our friend here is eager to meet the one who killed its sibling." As if on cue, the behemoth's sensory cluster oriented toward Reynolds, pulsing more rapidly. The Zareth operative stepped back, his work apparently complete. "I've programmed it with your neural signature, Colonel Reynolds," he said with evident satisfaction. "It will hunt you to the exclusion of all else. Let's see if you can break this one's spine." Before Reynolds could respond, the Zareth operatives activated some kind of smokescreen, filling the chamber with a dense, acrid fog. Reynolds fired into the smoke, but knew her shots were unlikely to find targets. "Kaito," she called out, "can you see them?" "Negative," came his response from somewhere to her left. "My vision is as compromised as yours." A massive shape moved through the smoke, the behemoth, its sensory cluster glowing like a baleful star. It moved with purpose, directly toward Reynolds' position. "Fall back!" she ordered, firing a burst at the creature. The energy pulses struck its exoskeleton and dissipated harmlessly, confirming her suspicion that this one was even more heavily armored than the first. They retreated into the corridor, Reynolds laying down covering fire that did little more than slow the behemoth's advance. The creature pushed through the doorway, metal screaming as it forced its massive frame through the too small opening. "We need to split up," Reynolds decided quickly. "It's programmed to hunt me. I'll lead it away while you get help." Kaito hesitated. "Colonel, that's suicide. This one's different, stronger, more controlled. Which is exactly why we can't let it reach the upper levels," Reynolds replied grimly. "Go, Major." "That's an order." Reluctantly, Kaito departed, heading for the maintenance shaft they had used to descend. Reynolds turned and fired another burst at the behemoth, this time aiming for its sensory cluster. The creature flinched, but continued its relentless advance. Reynolds led it on a chase through the quarantine level, using her knowledge of the facility layout to stay just ahead of its pursuit. Her goal was to reach the auxiliary hangar, where the heavier weapons were stored for emergency response teams. The behemoth pursued with single-minded determination, smashing through barriers and walls when corridors proved too narrow. Unlike the first creature, which had seemed almost berserk in its aggression, this one moved with calculated precision, anticipating Reynolds' evasive maneuvers. As she rounded a corner, Reynolds found herself face to face with a squad of Zareth operatives. Before either side could react, the behemoth burst through the wall behind her, its massive limbs lashing out indiscriminately. Two of the Zerath were caught by the creature's attack, their bodies flung aside like ragdolls. The others opened fire, their energy weapons leaving scorch marks on the behemoth's armored hide, but doing little real damage. Reynolds used the confusion to slip past, continuing toward the hangar. Behind her, the sounds of combat faded, replaced by the heavy tread of the behemoth resuming its pursuit. The Zerath had either been eliminated or had chosen to abandon their creation to its programmed hunt. The auxiliary hangar doors were sealed as part of the security lockdown. Reynolds used her override codes, praying they hadn't been revoked as part of her administrative leave. To her relief, the doors began to cycle open. Inside, emergency response vehicles sat ready for deployment, along with racks of weapons designed for various crisis scenarios. Reynolds headed directly for the heavy weapons cabinet, entering her authorization code. The cabinet refused to open. Authorization revoked, the system informed her dispassionately. Security Protocol 7 Alpha in effect. Reynolds swore under her breath. Harper had been thorough in restricting her access. She looked around desperately for an alternative as the hangar doors completed their opening cycle, revealing the behemoth's massive silhouette. The creature entered slowly, its sensory cluster scanning the hangar methodically. When it located Reynolds, it emitted a low, resonant sound that seemed to vibrate in her very bones. With no heavy weapons available, Reynolds grabbed a maintenance tool, a hydraulic jack used for lifting vehicle components during repairs. It was heavy and unwieldy, but better than facing the behemoth unarmed. The creature charged, covering the distance between them with frightening speed. Reynolds waited until the last possible moment, then dodged aside, swinging the jack with all her strength at the behemoth's knee joint. The impact reverberated up her arms, nearly causing her to lose her grip on the improvised weapon. The behemoth staggered, but didn't fall, pivoting with that unnatural precision to face her again. One of its limbs lashed out, catching Reynolds across the ribs and sending her flying into the side of a response vehicle. The impact drove the air from her lungs and sent pain lancing through her torso. Broken ribs, she diagnosed automatically, struggling to her feet. The behemoth advanced more cautiously now, as if it had learned from their brief exchange. Reynolds retreated, putting the response vehicle between them, looking for any advantage in the environment. Her gaze fell on the vehicle's fuel cells, highly volatile energy sources that powered the craft's engines. A desperate plan formed in her mind. Ducking under the vehicle, Reynolds used the hydraulic jack to rupture one of the fuel cells. Energy began to leak out in crackling blue arcs. The vehicle's warning systems activated, announcing an imminent power core breach. The behemoth circled the vehicle, trying to reach Reynolds. She continued to use the craft as a barrier, waiting for the right moment as the fuel cell's breach widened. "Come on, you oversized cockroach," she muttered. "Just a little closer." When the behemoth lunged around the front of the vehicle, Reynolds made her move. She rolled across the hangar floor, putting as much distance as possible between herself and the leaking fuel cell. The behemoth followed, stepping directly into the expanding pool of energy discharge. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the creature's metallic exoskeleton began to conduct the energy, blue arcs of power crawling across its massive frame. The behemoth roared, thrashing as the energy disrupted its systems. The fuel cell reached critical mass and detonated with a blinding flash. The explosion sent Reynolds tumbling across the hangar floor, her ears ringing from the concussive force. When her vision cleared, she saw the behemoth still standing, though parts of its exoskeleton had been blackened and warped by the explosion. It moved jerkily now, its precision compromised by damage to its systems. Reynolds struggled to her feet, her body protesting every movement. The hydraulic jack had been lost in the explosion. She was unarmed again, facing a wounded but still lethal adversary. The behemoth charged, its movements erratic but no less powerful. Reynolds stood her ground, waiting until it was almost upon her before dropping to the floor and rolling between its legs. As the creature passed over her, She reached up and grabbed hold of exposed connectors in its damaged exoskeleton. Using the behemoth's own momentum, Reynolds pulled herself up onto its back, clinging to the creature as it bucked and twisted, trying to dislodge her. Her fingers found purchase in the gaps of its armor, seeking the spinal structure she knew lay beneath. The behemoth slammed backward into a wall, nearly crushing Reynolds between its massive body and the unyielding surface. Pain exploded across her back, but she maintained her grip, climbing higher toward the creature's neural cluster. Reaching the junction where the sensory organs connected to the spine, Reynolds wrapped her arms around what served as the creature's neck. With every ounce of strength remaining in her battered body, she twisted and pulled. For several agonizing seconds, nothing happened. The behemoth continued to thrash, its limbs lashing out at empty air as it tried to reach the human clinging to its back. Reynolds gritted her teeth, muscles straining to their limit as she applied increasing pressure to the creature's spine. Then, with a sound like a thunderclap, the reinforced spinal column snapped. The behemoth's limbs spasmed violently, then went slack. Its massive body toppled forward, crashing to the hangar floor with Reynolds still clinging to its back. She rolled clear as the creature fell, its sensory cluster still pulsing weakly. Drawing on her last reserves of strength, Reynolds grabbed a piece of twisted metal debris and drove it through the neural cluster, ending the behemoth's existence permanently. Standing over the fallen creature, Reynolds swayed on her feet, blood trickling from a dozen minor wounds, and her breathing labored from her broken ribs. The hangar was silent, save for the crackle of small fires from the fuel cell explosion and the distant wail of alarm systems. 2 for 2, she murmured to the dead behemoth, then collapsed to her knees, the adrenaline that had sustained her finally ebbing away. That was how the emergency response team found her minutes later, kneeling beside the massive corpse of the behemoth, covered in blue fluid and her own blood, but undefeated. As they helped her to the medical bay, Reynolds caught sight of Major Cato watching from a doorway, his luminescent skin pulsing with what she interpreted as relief. Beside him stood Ambassador Hughes, his expression a mixture of awe and calculation. The political ramifications would come later. For now, Reynolds allowed herself to be guided to a medical bed, her mind already turning to the questions raised by the day's events. Who had enhanced the behemoths with Alliance technology? Why had they been programmed to target humans specifically? And what role did the Stellar Accord play in all of this? As a medical drone administered pain relief and began treating her injuries, Reynolds made a silent vow. She would find answers, no matter where they led or who they implicated. The security of Earth, perhaps of the entire Alliance, might depend on it. The footage of Reynolds snapping the first behemoth's spine had spread throughout the Alliance with the speed of quantum communication. The raw power displayed by the human kernel became both a source of fascination and fear among the various species. News feeds carried little else for days afterward. Political analysts debated the implications for interspecies relations. Military strategists reassessed their evaluations of human combat capabilities. And ordinary citizens of all species shared the video, captivated by the moment when a seemingly fragile human had overcome a biological weapon with nothing but determination and raw strength. Reynolds, meanwhile, found herself isolated in the diplomatic facility's medical center, ostensibly for treatment of her injuries, but effectively under house arrest. Brigadier General Harper had made it clear that her actions, both in killing the behemoths and in disobeying direct orders, would have severe consequences once the immediate diplomatic crisis had been resolved. On the third day of her confinement, Ambassador Hughes finally came to see her. The diplomat looked tired, the perfect creases of his uniform giving way to subtle signs of strain. "Colonel Reynolds," he greeted her formally. "How are your injuries?" Reynolds sat up in the medical bed, wincing as her ribs protested. "I'll live, Ambassador. What's the situation?" Hughes sighed and took a seat beside the bed. Complicated. The Zareth delegation is demanding your extradition for trial under their justice system. They claim you've committed 2 counts of sacred life desecration. Apparently those behemoths were some kind of religious symbols. Reynolds snorted in disbelief. Religious symbols that just happened to be programmed to hunt humans and equipped with military-grade enhancements? Yes, about that. Hughes leaned forward. Major Cato shared his findings with me. If true, they represent a serious breach of multiple treaties. And, Reynolds prompted when he hesitated. And they're being suppressed, Hughes admitted. Orders from Alliance Central Command. The official position is that the behemoths were standard security assets that malfunctioned during transport. Reynolds stared at him in disbelief. That's a lie. Ambassador. You've seen the evidence. I have, Hughes acknowledged. And I've also seen the potential for this incident to spiral into open conflict if mishandled. The Alliance isn't ready for war with the Zareth Dominion. So you're going to cover it up, Reynolds concluded flatly. Pretend none of this happened. Hughes shook his head. Not exactly. The incident itself is too public to deny. Your spine-breaking exploits are the talk of the galaxy, Colonel. But the details about the enhancements, the programming, those are being classified at the highest level. Reynolds studied the ambassador's face, looking for any sign that he was complicit in whatever conspiracy had led to the Behemoth incident. His expression revealed exhaustion and concern, but no guilt. What happens to me? She asked finally. That's where things get interesting, Hughes replied. The Zareth want you handed over. General Harper wants you court-martialed. But there's a third faction that sees you as a valuable asset precisely because of what happened in that negotiation chamber. The Stellar Accord, Reynolds guessed. Hughes nodded. They're pushing for your immediate promotion and assignment to their Special Operations Division. They're calling you a hero, the embodiment of human potential. Reynolds felt a chill that had nothing to do with her injuries. The same group that may have been involved in enhancing the behemoths with Alliance technology. Allegedly, Hughes cautioned. We have no proof of their involvement. Because the evidence is being suppressed, Reynolds pointed out. Hughes spread his hands in a gesture of resignation. Politics, Colonel. The game is always more complex than it appears from the battlefield. Reynolds leaned back against the medical bed, her mind racing. So what happens now? Now, Hughes said, rising to leave. You rest and recover. The diplomatic corps will handle the Zareth demands. General Harper will cool his heels. And when you're well enough, decisions will be made about your future. After the ambassador left, Reynolds activated the room's secure communication system. Connect me with Major Cato, she instructed. The Velen's translucent face appeared on the display, his skin patterns indicating concern. Colonel, I was about to contact you. There have been developments. I just spoke with Hughes, Reynolds told him. He says the evidence is being suppressed. Worse than that, Cato replied, his voice low. The remains of both behemoths have been released to the Zareth delegation. All biological samples have been destroyed, and the security recordings from the quarantine zone have been classified under the Alliance Secrecy Act. Reynolds clenched her fist. They're erasing everything. Not quite everything, Cato countered. I managed to secure copies of my findings before they were purged from the system. And I've identified something interesting in the neural programming of the second behemoth. Reynolds leaned closer to the display. What did you find? A recognition pattern, Cato explained. The creature was programmed to identify and target specific neural signatures, human signatures, but not just any humans. High-ranking Alliance military and diplomatic personnel. An assassination program, Reynolds concluded grimly. Precisely. And there's more. The programming contains markers I've seen before, in classified weapon systems developed by a research division associated with the Stellar Accord. Reynolds absorbed this information silently. The Stellar Accord wanted her as an operative. Yet they may have been involved in programming the Behemoths to assassinate Alliance leadership. It made no sense unless... They're playing both sides, she realized aloud, creating a threat they can then position themselves to counter. If key Alliance leaders had been killed by Zarath biological weapons, the Stellar Accord's militaristic agenda would gain immediate support, Kaido finished, and humans would be at the forefront of the resulting conflict. We need to bring this evidence to someone we can trust, Reynolds decided. That may be problematic, Kaido admitted. I've been reassigned to a research outpost in the Rigel sector. I leave tomorrow. I suspect it's to remove me from the investigation. Reynolds wasn't surprised. Anyone who knew too much about the Behemoth incident was being contained or relocated. Can you get the evidence to Earth? I have contacts in Alliance intelligence who operate outside the Stellar Accord's influence. I'll try, Kaido promised. But security is tight. All outgoing communications are being monitored. Then we'll need to be creative, Reynolds said. The Stellar Accord wants me as an asset. I'll use that to get close to them, find out who's behind this. Kaido's skin darkened with concern. That's extremely dangerous, Colonel. If they discover your intentions. It's a risk I'll have to take, Reynolds replied firmly. Someone engineered this crisis, and they need to be held accountable before they create another one. Their conversation was interrupted by the medical room's door sliding open to admit Brigadier General Harper, accompanied by 2 security officers. Colonel Reynolds, Harper announced formally. By order of Alliance Central Command, you are hereby reinstated to active duty and promoted to the rank of Brigadier General, effective immediately. Reynolds stared at him in shock, then at the display where Kaido's expression mirrored her own surprise. Sir, she questioned, certain she had misheard. The promotion comes with a new assignment, Harper continued, his tone making it clear he disapproved, but was following orders. You are to report to Stellar Accord headquarters on Earth as soon as you are medically cleared for travel. Reynolds maintained a neutral expression, though her mind was racing. May I ask the nature of the assignment, sir? That information is classified, Harper replied stiffly. You'll be briefed upon arrival. He placed a datapad on the medical bed. Your new credentials and transit authorization. A transport will be ready when you are. After Harper and his security detail departed, Reynolds turned back to the display where Kaido was waiting, his skin patterns now showing alarm. It appears the Stellar Accord has expedited their plans for you, he observed. Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. Which gives us an opportunity. I'll be inside their operation, with higher clearance than before. Or it's a trap, Kaido suggested. They may suspect we know more than we should. Reynolds couldn't dismiss the possibility. Either way, we proceed as planned. You secure the evidence. I'll investigate from within. The Velen scientist nodded reluctantly. Be careful, Colonel. Forgive me. General. These people engineered a diplomatic crisis and programmed living weapons for assassination. There's no telling what else they're capable of. Reynolds thought of the 2 behemoths she had faced, the feeling of their reinforced spines giving way beneath her strength. The memory brought both satisfaction and a lingering disquiet. Whatever they're planning, she said with quiet determination, I'll be ready. 5 days later, fully recovered thanks to advanced medical technology, Reynolds boarded a transport bound for Earth. She wore her new rank insignia, but felt no pride in the promotion. It was, she suspected, merely a means to control her, to keep her within the Stellar Accord's sphere of influence. As the transport departed Orinthia 7, Reynolds watched through a viewport as the diplomatic facility receded into the distance. Somewhere on that station, the negotiations between the Alliance and the Zarath continued, though with significantly altered parameters. The incident had changed everything. Humans were now viewed with a mixture of fear and respect by the other species. The image of Reynolds breaking the behemoth's spine had become a symbol of human strength, of defiance against terror, of the unpredictable nature of a species still finding its place in the galactic community. What that symbol would come to represent in the days ahead remained to be seen. Would it be a warning of human aggression and dominance, or a reminder that even the seemingly weakest species could rise to overcome overwhelming odds? Reynolds turned away from the viewport, her resolve hardening. Whatever forces were at work within the Alliance, whatever plans the Stellar Accord had for humanity's future, she would uncover the truth. And those responsible for using biological weapons as pawns in their political games would face justice. As the transport entered hyperspace, she felt a strange kinship with the behemoths she had destroyed. They too had been manipulated, their nature twisted to serve someone else's agenda. The difference was, she had broken free. And with that freedom came responsibility, to ensure that the spine she had snapped in that negotiation chamber did not become the first break in the alliance that held the galaxy together. From the shadows of a monitoring station on Earth, a figure watched the incoming transport data with interest. General Reynolds was returning to the cradle of humanity, just as planned. The incident on Orinthia 7 had played out almost perfectly. The human had demonstrated the species' potential for decisive action. The Zarath had been properly humbled, and the Alliance now looked to Earth for leadership in a time of uncertainty. There had been complications, of course. The destruction of both behemoths was regrettable. Those specimens represented years of research and enhancement, and the Velen scientist, Kaido, had proven more resourceful than anticipated. Measures would need to be taken to ensure his silence. But these were minor setbacks in a much larger design. Phase 1 had been completed successfully. The galaxy had witnessed human strength firsthand, in the most visceral way possible. Now, Phase 2 could begin. The figure smiled in the darkness as the transport carrying Brigadier General Reynolds entered Earth's defense perimeter. Soon, very soon, humanity would assume its rightful place in galactic affairs, and it would all have begun with the sound of an alien spine snapping beneath human hands. In the cargo hold of the transport, secured in a stasis chamber designed for biological specimens, a small fragment of the second behemoth's neural cluster pulsed with faint life. The creature was gone, but something of its essence remained, something that would eventually awaken to a new purpose. The game was just beginning.